Let's take a look at resin parts. Why do you want to add resin parts to your kit? Well, there's a few reasons. The first reason being that sometimes a kit manufacturer doesn't quite get things right. In other words, the dimensions or the size or shape of something might not be quite correct. And I have an armament set here for my Heinkel 111 from Aries. It's a really nice set, comes with some Photoetch pieces as well. And I took a look at the ammunition magazines that go on the guns in this airplane. And if you look at the little magazines here and compare them to the Photoetch resin ones, you can see the resin ones are larger. And I looked at a drawing and in reality, these were larger than what's in the kit. So I can put a more accurate representation in by using resin parts. Another reason to use resin would be ease of assembly. If you look at these exhaust stubs for my Heinkel, they're a single piece, they're all clean, there's no seam line, and the kit pieces are two-piece. In other words, I have to glue these two pieces together, and then I'd have to go back and fill and sand all around the seam lines on these. Whereas with this, I can just cut them off the stub and install them. So ease of assembly. The last reason would be missing detail. In other words, detail that's not in the kit. And in this armament set, they include some radio gear. So if I'm doing the radio room in my Heinkel, I can add in all the radio boxes and things and paint them up. So missing detail. So it takes some special tools and adhesives to work with resin parts. So let's take a look at those. Working with injection molded plastic parts and resin aftermarket parts is slightly different. Injection molded parts come out of a steel tool. In other words, there's two pieces of a tool that meet and they inject plastic into it, pop out the parts. The nice thing is the injection points are easy to cut, so the part comes off the screw easily, but since it's a two-piece mold, there's usually a seam line that runs around all the parts, and you have to go back and clean that off if you want to do a really good job. The advantage of resin parts in that respect is resin parts are manufactured usually in a silicone rubber mold, and the parts are molded in a single piece. In other words, this piece is molded in a single piece of rubber, then the rubber is separated and the part's pulled out. When you do that, you have no seam lines on the part, which is really nice, but you have to cut a lot of excess material off of the parts before you can use them. So that's the important thing that we're going to look at, is the tools to use to cut these pieces off of the buck and then how to attach them. The tools we use to work with resin parts are very similar to the tools we use to work with plastic injection molded parts, with a few additions. Obviously, you're going to need sanding materials, sanding sticks, blocks, sandpaper, some files to clean the parts up. You'll need tweezers to put the parts on. A pair of cutters always come in handy when you're cutting parts off. The big difference comes in taking the parts, the resin parts, off these pour blocks. The pour block is the extra material from when they poured the part into the mold. Now, some of these parts can be taken off with a standard X-Acto knife just by scribing along the line and snapping it off. But some of the larger parts, and we'll look at these exhaust stacks here, you can see there's some really heavy material here. What you need to use for that would be a saw of some sort. This is an X-Acto #1 knife, or a hobby knife, and it has a serrated edged saw which can be used to cut parts off the sprue or off the block. I have a larger saw here, a Zona saw. You can use that for longer cuts. And some people, for really heavy blocks of material, will use a Dremel or a cutoff wheel. You can see this has an emery wheel on this, and when I power up my Dremel saw here, my Dremel tool, I can use this to cut parts off of these blocks very easily. So basically very similar to plastic injection molded, but make sure you have saws and things of that nature to cut off those big blocks. As far as gluing these parts on, resin doesn't glue with plastic cement. Resin you have to use CA glue with. So as we discussed with Photoetch, there's different thicknesses of CA glue. There's thin CA, there's extra thick, there's medium. So get yourself some CA glue and some accelerator and you'll be able to glue all these resin parts on. Cutting and sanding resin parts creates a lot of dust. and you don't want to be breathing that dust. It's not good for you. So make sure when you work with resin, especially when you're cutting and sanding the parts, to wear a mask so that you don't breathe in the dust. And I like to wear rubber gloves also, so I don't get it on my hands and then, you know, accidentally ingest it. I also like to work at my paint booth. In other words, when I'm working on a part, I turn on my paint booth and let the air draw out the dust. So keep safety in mind and take the proper precautions when working with resin parts. I thought we'd wrap up our discussion of Photoetch and resin detailing parts with a little practical hands-on. So what we're going to do is we're going to assemble one of the machine guns from the Ares armament set for my Heinkel, and we're going to compare it to the original kit part so you can see the difference. As you can see, I have all my materials laid out here. I have my reference material so that I can compare the kit to the original, make sure I get the details right. I have all my tools. I have my glues, my tweezers, my knives, my cutting tools. I have all the parts here laid out. So let's get to it. Let's put the machine gun together and see how it goes. The first and most important step in working with Photoetch and resin is to make sure you review your instructions for the kit. In other words, make sure that you get the correct parts by reviewing the parts schematic here. And I've pulled out the parts that I need for this step here, number one, which is building the machine gun. As you can see, if I look at the back of this, it shows me where the other parts go to in the kit. So make sure to refer to your instructions. Don't lose them. They're very important. So here are the parts that we'll need to build the machine gun. I've pulled out this block, which has the breech handle and the barrels on it. I have this block here, which has the machine gun magazine or the ammunition magazine. It has this little bag that goes underneath that collects spent shells, and it has the cocking handle on it. So those are important. And then finally, the Photoetch fret has the machine gun sights and so forth on it. So these are the parts we're going to use. So let's remove some of these parts from these blocks, and then we'll start assembly. To remove the parts from the block, I'm going to use two different tools. I'm going to use my razor saw here, my little saw blade, to take the block or the magazine off of this block because it's a pretty thick connection. The other tool I'll use will be just a straight edge or a regular knife blade to take the barrels and the breeches off because they're fairly thin connecting points. So let's take this razor and we'll take it right to this magazine here, and I'll go right up to the edge of the magazine. I don't know if you can see that, just like that. And I'll carefully saw until it comes off of the block. This is going to take just a little bit of time here. We'll cut it off. Almost there. Okay. Well, at the same time, I removed the little bag also. Here you can see that came off at the same time. So that's okay. We'll keep that there. We have the little magazine. And you can see it's creating a little bit of dust here. I'll get that out. That's why I wear my gloves. So now we'll take the breeches here and the barrels, and I'm going to use my regular knife blade, and I'm just going to score this right along here so that I can take it off. Now if you like, you could score down to the bottom here. Score this down, and kind of like styrene when you score it, if I score it enough, I can just break this off. See how it broke right on that line that I scribed? Then I can go back and I can just cut this off like that. So that gets rid of the block. So there's my breech. And now we need one of these barrels. So what we're going to do is the same thing, and these are really easy to take off. Just cut one of these off. So there, now I have the 4 resin parts that are involved. I have the Photoetch piece here, and we'll take the Photoetch gun sight off the way we take Photoetch off. My Photoetch gun sight has 2 connecting points, one at the top and one at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is, as we discussed in the previous video, I'm going to take my straight edge, which is this guy here, and I'm going to very carefully pop this guy off by cutting the fret. I have to do it on both sides. fell off right there. So there's my gun sight. So I'll put that with those. So there's all my parts. My next step will be to go back and clean up the areas where I removed these parts from the stubs. In other words, on the back of the machine gun magazine, I'm just going to sand that a little bit, and then I'll take my X-Acto knife or my hobby knife and I'll clean off the areas where I removed these from the pour block. So these are the parts. I'm going to clean those up and then we'll come back and glue them together. So I've cleaned up all my parts. I'm ready to assemble, and we're going to use super glue. We're going to use cyanoacrylic glue to put them together, maybe a little accelerator if I need to speed up drying time. So I'll put this together and then we'll compare it to the original kit piece and see the difference that Photoetch and resin detailing parts make. I've assembled the Photoetch resin parts, put them together, and I shot a little bit of primer on the original kit piece and the Photoetch piece. And you can really see the difference in the aftermarket piece compared to the original kit part. Really sets it apart. So the extra effort is really worth it. It'll set your models apart from everyone else's, bring you up to contest quality. This is really great stuff. So Photoetch resin, take your models to the ultimate level. Well, that's it for model detailing parts. Gave you a basic knowledge of what you're doing with Photoetch and resin detailing parts. Do a little bit of research. Remember, there's publications out there like the Photoetch book. Do a little bit of reading, check out your model, get some parts, experiment, and good luck. And until next time, keep modeling.